Andes, the longest chain of mountains on the planet, and still growing. It lies along the edge of South America like an immense dragon. On its back, savage spines. At its head, fire. It is forged by pieces of the Earth's crust crashing together, opening volcanoes, pushing up and creating different and unexpected worlds. The mountains hide extraordinary life. Unique. Bizarre. And surprising. It is life, thriving at the extreme, hidden among the spines of the dragon's back. If the Andes is like a dragon, this is the tip of the dragon's tail, 5,000 miles from its head. At South America's southernmost point, the mountains seem to fall into the Antarctic Ocean. Snow becomes glaciers which break off as icebergs. Cape Horn, and the world's roughest stretch of sea. For the animals that live here, this is just the way the world is. They cope. In fact, they thrive. When penguins seek shelter and some peace, there are hundreds of islands here with glassy fjords and deep channels. Above them, the Andes. Starting from the tip of Chile and going up the coast, there are 1,000 miles of almost vertical forest. It's untouched, the least explored place on Earth. The penguins explore a bit, though. They land where the mountains meet the water and start climbing. They're not mountaineering for the challenge of it. They're looking for the safe place to nest. All penguins have to lay eggs on solid ground. It's just that the only land for these Magellanic penguins is almost straight up and down. Most of the time, they're at sea fishing for sardines or anchovies. Once a year, they return home to the Andes. The penguins, who mate for life, find a safe shelter or dig a burrow. The female lays and the two of them take turns sitting and fishing. It's an arduous life, hunting in storms and climbing mountains, but it's undisturbed. There's nobody here for hundreds of square miles. These forests are barely known to science, only sketchily studied. It's a strange assortment with everything seeming slightly askew. This, for instance, might look like a rat, but it's an opossum, a marsupial with a baby-carrying pouch. It's hardly changed since South America was a flat island and the main land animals were dinosaurs. Opossums are far older than the Andes themselves. This might look like somebody's tabby cat. It's not. It's half the size. It's a cod, the smallest wildcat. No one knows much about it, except that, like a bird, it builds its nest high in the trees. That its kittens live up there as if they were birds. Nobody even knew it existed until scientists came here. It's the most secret animal found yet in a land full of secrets. What's weird here is the scale of things. This is the world's smallest deer, emerging from under a rhubarb leaf. It's a poodoo, 12 inches tall at the shoulder. A land of little animals, outsized plants, and right through the middle of it all, a monstrous glacier grinding through the forest. On the glacier's edges, wild fuchsia is visited by fire-crowned hummingbirds. Nowhere else in the world are hummingbirds and glaciers next to each other. Or hummingbirds and penguins, for that matter. This is a good day for fishing. Usually there's high wind and pouring rain. In fact, southern Chile gets 15 feet of rain a year, 3 times more than Scotland. That stormy weather isn't a penguin's biggest problem. Out there are sea lions which thrive on penguins. These southern seas are rich with fish and fish eaters and the eaters of fish eaters. It's this braying that gave the Magellanic penguin its more descriptive name, the jackass penguin. Killer whales or not, the penguins have to fish. Once underwater, they can suddenly fly. It's very cold water. In fact, everything at this southern end of the Andes is cold. This used to puzzle early explorers. After all, the same latitude in the northern hemisphere would be Venice, or the south of France. But here, there's a glacier, the San Rafael. It moves several hundred yards a year, grinding the mountainsides, making the peaks ever steeper and sharper. It wasn't until 1962 that the source of this and other glaciers was discovered. A solid sheet of ice the size of Wales, cooling the whole region. There was a time, at the last ice age, when these peaks were under the ice cap. The glaciers carved them into spines. Today, the ice has receded, and the still growing mountains are pushing higher. The peaks reach above the clouds. Every day, the warm, wet wind of the Pacific hits the mountains, is forced up, becomes cold, and delivers rain or snow. As it dries, it heads east to the Patagonian desert. Sheltered by the peaks of Torres del Paine and watered by the melting snow, is a sanctuary for wildlife. Its guard is the guanaco, the New World camel and wild relative of the domesticated llama and alpaca. This is a male stationed on a hillock, protecting his females from other males. And from predators. Not that a fox would threaten this guanaco. No, the killer he's watching for is this one, a puma. The animals the pumas stalk may differ throughout their huge range, Canada to Chile. But the hunting technique, whenever there's a herd of anything, is pretty much the same. Circle the animals and try to spot the old, the young, the weak. Then charge in at 40 miles an hour. When this puma catches her breath, she'll eat as much as she can. Even with the help of cubs, it's not possible to eat the whole thing one go. Almost anywhere else a puma would drag its leftovers to a hiding place, but out here, there isn't one. The best the mother can do is to cover the food with grass and twigs. It's summer, and the cubs are about 3 months old. Their eyes are still baby blue, but by next spring they will turn as tawny as their mothers. That's if the cubs survive that long, which isn't a certainty. Carcasses are few and far between, so condors soar hundreds of miles to spot a meal. With its 9-foot wingspan, it's the biggest flying bird in the world, the size of a small car. As with vultures anywhere, it only takes one to find the food. Then the rest gather. For other animals, a congregation of condors could also mean a meal. Or a meal lost. A fox is no match for a condor. It doesn't have to be, only quick. And ready to take advantage of the squabbles that break out among the condors themselves. The need to feed is more urgent because summer is short here and almost all the animals have young. This fox, by the way, is a zorro. In Spanish, zorro means fox, but this is different, found only in South America. Zorros resemble coyotes as much as they do other foxes. Zorros and pumas are the two main carnivores here, but zorros live shorter lives, with many cubs dying from cold or being snatched by eagles. Pumas take zorro cubs too. Zorros move house a lot. It's a way of outfoxing pumas that might have spotted the den. It's also a way of avoiding housework, which zorros simply won't do. The den gets dirty, the cubs get moved. The trouble is, every time you move, you get new neighbors. The world over, grazers don't like meat-eaters, even if they're small and not much of a threat. So guanacos don't like zorros. It's just a matter of principle. In victory, a guanaco smile. When summer is over, guanacos, zorros and pumas climb down the Andes. They would freeze in the winds of the Patagonian ice sheet. In Europe, this latitude would be hot, and we'd be heading towards Africa. But here, heading north towards the equator, it still won't get any warmer. Some peaks are almost 5 vertical miles above sea level, the highest points outside the Himalayas. The Himalayas are old and hardly moving. The Andes are half their age and growing from inside. The sliding mass of South America is colliding with solid rock under the Pacific. In the last century, the Andes have risen hundreds of feet in places. A peak in the Andes may yet top Everest. The mountains follow the coastline of Chile and Peru and are rarely out of sight of the sea. There's as much mountain below the coastline as above it. Measured from their underwater base, the Andes are already the tallest mountains in the world. From sea floor to mountain top, 10 miles, straight up. Cold currents from the Antarctic sweep along the bottom, bringing rich compost. Offshore winds draw the nutrients up. The end result is fish food. And billions of fish. Just along this coast, there are more fish than there are humans on the whole planet. And where there are fish, 20 million tons of them, there are seabirds, some 25 million of these. It's the biggest concentration of vertebrate life in existence. It supports cities of sea lions, all bringing up young. The birds are doing it too. As soon as the youngsters can swim or fly, the whole mass of life leaves until next year. Then the condors come down from the peaks, knowing there'll always be a few that have been left behind. That's how nourishment from the bottom of the ocean makes it all the way to the mountain top. In between, where the peaks are set back a bit, there's a stretch of land that's been entirely papa. Out of nowhere, and nowhere. The Atacama Desert. There are places here where it has never, ever rained. It is officially the driest place on Earth. The only rain is marooned on the other side of the Andes, held back by the high spine of the dragon. It's a 600-mile-long ribbon of sand reaching into the tropics. Where there's just a little moisture every now and then, that's all it takes. Plants grow. Animals come. The guanaco, the South American camel, does as well here as 3,000 miles further south, though the climates are as different as Scotland and the Sahara. Its broad feet are as good in the sand as in the snow. The zorro is here too. It feeds on beetles and rodents mainly, and uses its sensitive ears to detect faint scratchings under the sand. But what it hears right now isn't faint at all. Humboldt penguins. Doing what penguins have to do, coming ashore to nest. Birds, built for swimming in the coldest of cold water, climb over the driest of dry rocks. When they get where they're going, they have energy left for a song and dance routine. to do a lot of dancing to get a mate. If you don't do it well enough. Oh well. The reason the penguins climb so far is to keep their chicks safe from the crush on the beach. But they need fresh fish, so it's up and down these cliffs every day. And where it's too steep to walk, they ski. After an afternoon of dust and demanding chicks, they can't seem to get back to the sea fast enough. First, there's the sea lion colony to get through, and sea lions eat penguins. But not now, as it happens, while they're raising pups. At this time of year, they're grudgingly tolerant. Before they start fishing, the penguins wash off the dust and play in the shallows. A few hundred feet above, a guanaco might envy a cooling dip in the sea, but today it doesn't need to move. A shift in the breeze and the cold sea fog sweeps up the cliff and inland. It's the only moisture for this part of the Atacama, and the reason there are plants here at all. Droplets form and lichen on a cactus, and that's enough to make the cactus blossom, and to give the guanaco something special to eat. This is the comparatively lush part of the desert. Travel north, beyond the Atacama, and there is little but sand. Yet there is some strange wildlife to be found here, too. In the 1920s, an early aviator looked down. He was the first to see messages from the distant past. A spider, 50 yards across. A monkey the size of a football pitch. Carved 1,500 years ago by people who could never have seen them from above. There are hummingbirds, condors, killer whales, flamingos. They were spirit guides for shaman, guides into the mountains, the home of the gods. The flamingos head across the desert and up into the Andes, heading to the broad back of the dragon. As they go higher still, they reach the Altiplano, and the biggest surprise of all. This isn't snow, it's salt. A flat sea of salt. It's the largest salt pan in the world, stretching from Argentina and Chile through Bolivia to Peru. Those islands in the Salt Sea, they're mountain peaks, and each with a precarious community of life. The flamingos keep climbing, until they see what might be a freshwater oasis. But no, the lakes scattered across the Altiplano are poisonous, steaming, caustic. The water comes from within the belly of the dragon, inside volcanoes, saturated with poisonous salts. Few other animals could even stand in burning liquid like this, much less put their heads in it. But flamingos can and do, to feed on the only other life in the water, brine shrimp. Shrimp that turn pink when they die, passing the color to the flamingos. The flamingos breed on the lake, but not all the young survive. The corpses of some of last year's brood lie, mummified in salt. Brine flies tend in sandpipers and other birds. Around the lakes are the mountain peaks, the salt sea islands. There is no rain for 9 months of the year, so the food chain is short and simple. Cactus. Cactus flowers. Finches eat the flowers. Hummingbirds drink their nectar. And that's about it, in these tiny isolated communities of saltpan diehards. It's a lonely life, and that's why flamingos come here. The birds have the privacy to dance. They choose their mates as they dance. These are Chilean flamingos, but wherever there are flamingos in the world, they do the same dance. The Altiplano is in the tropics, and so, despite its altitude, it's warm during the day. But when the sun sets, winter arrives. The air's too thin and dry to hold the daytime heat, and temperatures drop from a high of 30 degrees to 15 below. Different animals have different ways of coping. Each night, this hummingbird almost dies. Only its heart, liver and brain hold on to life, a tiny core of warmth. It turns its heartbeat down, and without even a shiver, surrenders to the cold. With the sun gone, the only warmth comes from the earth. Cracks in the dragon's skin vent geysers, boiling springs, and fountains of hot acid. Some of the flamingos have made their way to these natural saunas. They sleep bathed in the steam and the stench of sulfur. The flamingos that stay out on the lakes will be frozen in for the night. With the sun, the warmth of spring returns. For the hummingbird, a resurrection. For the flamingos, if they are lucky, a release. Beyond the salt sea, there's some rare meltwater from nearby peaks. Freshwater streams of grass beside them. These streams too go through their nightly winter, thaw in the morning and flow again. But the animals that depend on them are a little slower to move. These are vizcacha. Although they look like rabbits, they're actually more like giant mice. While they get their warmth back in their bones, they sit like monks, muttering incantations to the sun. That they've got through the night at all is a tribute to the quality of their fur, among the warmest in the world. Fortunately for them, it molts all the time and is useless to the fur trade. The same can't be said of this animal's fleece. It's a vicuña, a slimline version of the guanaco. Its wool is considered to be the finest in the world. So they were hunted here, 15,000 feet above sea level and hundreds of miles from the nearest town. Having faced extinction, vicuñas are protected now, but very rare, and still very nervous. This morning, it's the vizcachas who have more to fear. There are eagles up here. Zorros too. Zorros can't do much chasing. They're starved of oxygen in the thin air. Everything is double the effort. Even walking is hard work. So it's easier to scare some caracaras off an old vicuña carcass. There's no knowing what killed a vicuña. A puma, maybe. Well, probably something to do with the extremes. The nighttime freeze, the lack of oxygen, or no rain. Life is on the very edge here. Any higher, and it's only the mountains that are alive. Volcanoes mark the equator with fire and snow. "2,000 volcanoes run north towards the end of the mountain chain. They're like ramparts on a high wall. They force apart two worlds, isolating the dry altiplano. And what lies beyond? Clouds. Rain piles up, unable to reach the Altiplano or the Atacama Desert beyond. Warm clouds blow all the way from the Atlantic across Brazil and can't get any farther. They rise up the Andes' eastern slopes, drenching everything beneath them. The moorland becomes a saturated sponge. This is in the heart of the tropics, yet 18,000 feet up, it's colder than Dartmoor in winter. And much wetter. The result is the birth of a million streams, all of which are on their way to the greatest river on Earth. At the source of the Amazon are torrent ducks. Ducklings play in and out of the treacherous rapids, looking for food and dancing with danger. surprise, something as fragile as a duckling braves the Andes to play in a freezing torrent. Along the mountain streams is another world. These tall flower spikes are from bromeliad plants called puyas. Each blooms only once. If it's lucky, a hummingbird will come to pollinate it, inadvertently taking a busload of mites to the next flower it visits. One flower spike in 30 years for a hummingbird that might not come. It's a desperate gamble for a plant. A lifetime's effort destroyed in a minute. The white markings on their faces give these animals their name, spectacled bears. The cubs here are a few months old and learning from their mother how to survive in the mountains. Downstream, the rivers going down meet the trees coming up. This is the edge of the cloud forest. At up to 40 stone, the spectacled bear is South America's largest predator, yet they're found in the treetops. Paddington bear from darkest Peru must have been a spectacled bear. They are the only bears here. They search for more bromeliads growing on branches in the canopy. A fox is up there too, though not quite as sure-footedly as the bear. It's called the grey tree fox. It's not a Zorro, but an invader from North America. It lives mainly on birds' eggs. These cloud forests cloak the Andes through Ecuador and Colombia. A mountainside here is officially the wettest place on Earth, with 40 feet of rain a year. Farther down the slopes of Peru becomes the Amazon jungle. The rivers flow into each other and surge down the mountains as if they were trying to fill up South America. Which once they did. 10 million years ago, as the Andes rose, they formed a gigantic rim around the entire western half of the continent, turning it into a basin. It was perhaps the biggest lake the world has ever known. It didn't last long. The continent's eastern edge gave into the pressure, and rivers broke through to the Atlantic. With a constant flow of water from the Andes, it has never managed to drain completely. What was left was the Amazon, holding a fifth of all the river water in the world. South America had been an island for 100 million years, full of opossums, giant armadillos, and sloths as large as cows. The Andes kept rising and formed a land bridge with North America. 3 million years ago, bears, foxes, and jaguars came down and found a new home in South America. In the foothills of the Andes, the residents and the immigrants met. So this is why, today, there are more types of plants and animals here than anywhere else. The world's ultimate immigrant set foot in South America only 20,000 years ago. At huge waterfalls, people pit their wits against gravity and fish. This catfish was heading back towards the Andes. They breed upstream. It's part of the world's biggest migration of freshwater fish. Fish might seem less likely mountaineers even than penguins, but their search for a nursery for their young is just as urgent. The Andes have been a human sanctuary too. prehistoric tribes traveled down the neck of the dragon and up into the mountains. Deep in the Andes, great civilizations came and went. This is Inca territory in Peru. These 500-year-old temples at Machu Picchu were only reclaimed from the jungle in 1911. They had found a local plant and cultivated it, the potato. The Incas built massive terracing to make fields, and so turned mountains into giant stairways. Peppers, lima beans and tomatoes are from the Andes too. They domesticated the guanaco, creating llamas and alpacas for wool, meat and transport. The wheel never reached the Andes, so the Inca roads are as steep as a fully laden llama can climb. From the capital at Cusco, roads stitched together an empire 4,000 miles long. The Incas' descendants still celebrate their llamas on race day. In the end, 15 million Incas were crushed by just 200 Spanish adventurers. But the past isn't forgotten. Every year, the Incas' descendants hold a ceremony. They climb a glacier at dawn to offer their thanks and to greet the rising sun. And what they're honoring is their home, the Andes. The Andes and all worlds the mountains have created. The tip of South America. The dry desert beside a cold sea. The great salt pan and its burning lakes. The piles of clouds behind rising peaks. The mountaineers living on the edge. And the Andes themselves like a dragon's back. A dragon that day by day is growing a little bigger.